Today, I'll be discussing 5 misconceptions that can dramatically impact your retirement, quality of life, and financial position. These are not theoretical ideas. These are trends I've seen in practice with clients over the last 15 years. My goal of today is to provide you with some concepts and examples of these 5 misconceptions and how they can help keep you on track. As always, this isn't personalized financial advice. This is commentary based on 15 years in working with clients through retirement, seeing a lot of the challenges they face, and maybe some of you out there are facing these same challenges today. Now, before we get started, and for those who don't know me, I'm Mike Colopy, a co-founder and wealth advisor with Veracity Capital. We're an employee-owned boutique wealth management firm. We help rising executives and folks looking to transition into retirement with investments and planning. If this video resonates with you, if you have questions, feel free to book a meeting on my YouTube page directly with me, one-on-one. I'd be happy to talk in more details. So let's get started with misconception number 1, and that's about debt usage. Is it good? Is it bad? How much debt should we have, right? Think about debt like gasoline. When it's in a car, it can help the car move forward from point A to point B. When it's used inappropriately, it can start a wildfire. Debt is very similar in that concept where it's not debt itself that causes the problem, it's actually how it's used. So let's go through a few examples here. First up, we have housing debt. Housing debt is generally seen as a better type of debt. You take out a mortgage, you own an asset that's going to hopefully appreciate in value over the long run. That is generally seen as better debt as long as you're not getting over your skis and finding yourself in a over-levered position. Now, next we have student loans. Student loans can be a good use of debt. Really depends on what your prospects are after finishing school, what skill set you have, what's your trajectory from an earnings and career standpoint, and is it really preparing you for a strong financial future and a fulfilling future for that matter. Then we move on to car debt. Car debt really isn't good debt. It's necessary at many times. We all have to get from point A to point B to our jobs. We have to move our kids around, right? So we need to have a vehicle. However, debt for vehicles is not seen as a positive because vehicles are a depreciating asset, right? So a necessary debt probably, but definitely not a good debt. This is where people can really get themselves into trouble by getting too much car relative to the cash flow they have. This is not a smart place to over-lever yourself because we know that cars are going to lose value over the long term, unless you're that rare car collector that happens to have a, Porsche 911 or something. They're going to lose value over the long term. And then that brings us to even the worst debt, and that's just general consumer debt. This is if you're trying to furnish your home using debt. If you're going on vacation, putting it on the credit cards and leaving it there for months on end, that is not an appropriate or good use of debt. That is really where people start to get themselves in trouble, and it's a really slippery slope when you're spending from your future self. Now, I'll go through a couple rules or guidelines I like to follow, but I think you kind of get the trend here, right? Debt tied to appreciating assets or assets that hold their value. That's generally seen as a little bit better type of debt. Debt that's tied to things that lose their value or things that are consumer goods, vacations, things like that, not a good use of debt. And I'm not saying don't pay for your vacation on your credit card. I'm just saying don't carry it on your credit card. That is a trend, again, that moves in the wrong direction. I've seen people get themselves in trouble. Try to avoid that at all costs. Now, a few of the guidelines. Number 1, when you're looking at your debt and the payments you owe, don't think about the best times. Think about the worst times. Think about when the market's not doing well, or maybe you're having trouble with work and your income. Can you still afford to cover your debts? Always think about your situation during the tough times. We know you can get through it in the good times. What about the tough times? Tough times will come. There is always a tough time in front of us in our life. Now, rule number 2 relates to the interest rates on debt. I look at this as a 4 to 6% rule. Any debt that's tied to a asset that holds its value or that appreciates. So we'll use a mortgage, for example. Any debt, mortgage debt, below 4%, I'm usually pretty comfortable carrying that debt. That is generally a little bit more palatable, productive. You can usually grow your savings in your portfolio at a higher rate than 4%. I think that's a decent cutoff in today's world. On the other side, 6% rate, anytime debt is 6% or higher, that's really where I'm more anxious to start paying it down. That's where I think maybe it makes sense to not save as aggressively and actually pay your debt down more aggressively. In between that 4 to 6%, it's really more of a personal preference. I tend to lean towards anything above 4, wanting to pay it down a little quicker. Some people make the argument, and they're not wrong, that my investments, my portfolio, my savings are going to grow at a faster rate than my 4 to 6% debt. They're probably right. But again, it gets a little bit more into a personal preference at that point. But 4 to 6% is the range I always use. I'm comfortable under 4, over 6, pay it down as quickly as you can. That's generally the approach we take. Next on the, rules or the guidelines is going to be about housing. Two separate housing rules. First is if you're buying a primary residence, it should be a home you're planning to stay in for 10 years or close to 10 years. I used to say 5 years, now I say 10 years. The reason is there's a lot of friction when you're buying and selling properties related to commissions and furnishings and all those surprise costs when you get in and you didn't realize it, but they actually needed a new HVAC system sooner than you expected. There's always those surprise costs. So what I generally say is if you're going to buy a home, buy right, buy something that you're going to be in for longer term so that you can handle those costs a little bit more appropriately over the long run. You don't want to be flip-flopping every 3 years. I know there's strategies out there related to avoiding cap gains and rolling your homes every 2 years. I just think that's not for most people. And really, you want to think about this on a longer term basis. And then further on debt is how much home to actually buy. The rule of thumb in our industry generally says look to buy a home valued at 2 to 4 times your gross income. So if you make $100,000, that would mean buy a home for $200,000 to $400,000. That doesn't work for everybody, right? I'm sure there's a family out there with 5 kids that's watching this and saying, "Hey, I just can't get enough house for $400,000 in my area." Yeah, you might need to stretch it in a certain situation. There's also the flip side out there where somebody's a physician, they make $500,000 a year, and they're thinking 2 to 4x, like, I don't need a $2 million home. And you're right, you probably don't, depending on where you live. So this is just a very generic guideline, but it's supposed to be helpful in framing what is a normal sort of property value to buy based on the money that you make. Now let's jump into misconception number 2. More complexity means more returns. This relates to investments, right? I hear this all the time. I used to hear this when I worked back in corporate America. People would think if they had access to the right investments, I'll give a few examples like hedge funds, private equity, IPOs, pre-IPOs, structured notes, all these things. If they had access, they could get much, much better returns. This would change their life. Things would be different. Now, my experience says that's not necessarily the case. And it's not necessarily appropriate for everyone to jump into those more esoteric, less transparent type investments. Like with anything, you want to build a foundation, build a base of knowledge and comfort when you're moving into new markets. I'll give this example. There's professional athletes out there who have great workouts and have incredible results and they look amazing. But it doesn't mean we should go wake up and jump into their workout because they get great results. We would need to build a foundation first, be really prepared before we got involved in something like that. The same holds true for investing. You need to build a foundation, usually with stocks, publicly traded stocks, real estate, maybe some bonds, have some cash, right? You need to build your foundation. Then you start leaning into those, maybe start leaning into those more esoteric sort of investments. They're not necessarily going to change your life. They can do more harm than good if you don't know what you're getting into. So I think that's an overplayed misconception that more complexity means more returns. Now, moving on to misconception number 3. Maxing out your 401k means you're going to be okay for retirement. This is another misconception. Now, maxing out your retirement accounts is generally a great idea. You may get a company match. You're tucking money away for retirement. You're getting tax-deferred compounded growth. You're probably getting a tax deduction on your tax return. You're locking money up. You're really not accessing it until you're 59 and a half. There's all these great things about putting money into retirement accounts. but it's not always enough. You need to think more about your income, your salary, how you want to replace that income when you're actually in retirement. I've seen a lot of higher income earners who've maxed out their 401k. They get to retirement and their 401k is not big enough to truly replace their salary. And I'll give you an example here. We're thinking about income replacement, right? So let's take two people, they're 25 years old, they're both in the medical field, they're earning $100,000 per year, and their income is going to go up by 3% per year. So $100,000 a year, 3% growth on their income. They're age 25, they're going to work till 65. So nice long 40-year career. Now, person A is going to save 15% of their paycheck, which is incredible. Great savings rate. Person B is going to save 20% of their paycheck. And they're going to grow it at the same rate. It's going to be invested the same rate. At the end of this example, age 65, person A has about $4.7 million in their retirement account at the end of this example. They're 65 years old. And when they look to withdraw 4% of that, it's $187,000. So it's a 58% of their income replacement, right? When they retired, because of that growth, they were making well over $300,000, right? Keep in mind, it's a 40-year example, right? But now that they're retired and they're drawing 4% out of their portfolio, they're getting $187,000. That's a big step back for somebody. Social Security may not cover that gap. Now you look at person number two, they were able to save $6.2 million. And their income, based on 4% of their portfolio, is going to be about $250,000. So they're replacing closer to 75% of their income. They saved 5% more per year, but they have 30% more income during retirement. So that savings rate can make a huge impact. And the point of all this is 401ks might not be enough. You may need to save more than you think. You may need to save outside of 401ks in taxable brokerage accounts. It's very, very common for folks, especially high income earners, that they start building up other accounts and other asset buckets for retirement. Now, misconception number 4, investments are the main driver of wealth. Most people overestimate their ability to grow their wealth by investing and underestimate their ability to grow their wealth through human capital. For most people early in their careers, it's more about building a great career and great earnings power. It's less about, did your portfolio return 7% or 15%, right? Those are two very, very different numbers, but the earnings power can really outweigh what your returns are. So again, human capital, we're thinking more about your earning power, your ability to get raises and promotion, maybe get paid in equity in your company, become a partner, things like that. It's your ability to build relationships, to expand your network. As you do that, there may be better opportunities, higher value opportunities that become available. So one way to think about it, wealth creation comes from your earnings power. Wealth building comes from taking those earnings and investing them over time. So you need both ingredients, but one comes before the other and one is much more impactful. I'll give you another example here. We'll talk about two different people. First one we'll call investor A. The second one we'll call builder B. They both start out saving at the age of 25. Investor A is only saving $5,000 a year, while builder B is saving $10,000 a year. The builder has built a huge amount of human capital. They're able to earn more, save more. Investor A, not quite as much, still saving well, but saving at $5,000 a year. Now, investor A, two key notes, they're going to be generating 15% a year in returns, and they're going to be increasing their savings rate by 1% per year. So every year they're increasing their savings a little bit. Builder B is going to earn 7% a year in returns, but they're going to increase their savings rate by about 5% per year. So we have one person who has great investment results. We have another person who's just building the bucket with more savings. And after 20 years, age 45, where do they end up? Well, investor A has about $450,000 saved, which is a great nest egg. Builder B is over $1 million though. The compounding, the human capital, the growth rate of their savings rate really carried them over the top. Now, the point of this, human capital is so valuable. We need to be thinking about this. We need to be talking to our kids about this. This is what we really want to do to create wealth during our lifetime, is building our human capital. Now, misconception number 5 is that money does not equal fulfillment. Now, helping people retire is a core part of my job, my career and profession. But over the years, I've seen these trends. I've seen what makes clients more fulfilled in retirement, the things that really matter the most to them. And that's why I've created my fulfillment framework that I use and think about in the back of my mind when talking with clients and all of you. Fulfillment goes far beyond just the numbers in our portfolio. It really looks at 4 different factors. That's your health, community, financial independence, and your purpose. Now, health is the foundation for a happy retirement, yet it's one of those things we often overlook, especially during our careers. We're busy, we have families, we have careers. There's a lot of things going on where health is very easy to push to the back burner. But the reality is simple. A happy retirement is a healthy retirement. I can't tell you what meal plan to follow or what exercises to do, but I can tell you, among the many retirees I've worked with, health is a common thread. Without it, even the largest of portfolios loses some of its value. Now, second on the list is community, and community means different things to different people, but this is really about the people you impact most and that impact you. It's your family, it's your friends, it's your colleagues, mentors, mentees, anybody that's very important in your life that you find some purpose in being with. Strong relationships are often a factor in looking at retirement and lifetime fulfillment, especially later in life. Yet, just like health, community is often overlooked. We're just too busy to apply the time and energy to maintain relationships. I'm guilty of it too. Free time often disappears. We're just busy with other activities. But from my experience, the retirees that thrive, they do put in the energy, they do put in the effort and time to build and maintain those strong relationships throughout their community with friends, family, and folks that really drive them with purpose. Now, next on the list is financial independence. That's the third pillar of the framework. And it doesn't mean you need a $10 million portfolio or some sort of magic number. It's about creating a lifestyle where you feel very comfortable financially. It's about being able to make decisions independently, when to retire, where to travel, when to travel. Having enough flexibility in retirement that you feel independent, stress-free, and have peace of mind. In other words, it's less about the balance in your portfolio. It's more about the money you have, the purpose for it, and the way you spend it. Now, moving on to pillar number 4 of the framework, we're going to talk about purpose. This is the why behind your days. And here's the interesting thing. Many people find their purpose in the first 3 items we discussed. It is about their health and their health routine. It is about their community and their friends and family. It is about building their finances and being involved and making sure they have a strong understanding of their finances. Purpose does not have to be some grand mission or passion project, but every fulfilled retiree that I've worked with does have a sense of purpose, a hobby, a cause, mentorship, travel, friends, family, something that's driving them day by day. Now I'll wrap it up here. Those are the 5 misconceptions I commonly hear. They seem harmless on the surface, but they can have a dramatic impact on the trajectory of our financial health and our overall fulfillment during retirement. And if there's one thread that I can find that connects all of this, it's that fulfilled retirees have intentionality with what they're doing, building their retirement both financially and from a health and community standpoint. They're being very intentional and impactful with their money, their time, and their energy. That's why I think the fulfillment framework is very valuable for those thinking about and planning for retirement. If you found this helpful, I'd love you to stick around for future episodes. If you'd like to talk in more detail, one-on-one again, feel free to book time through my YouTube page, directly on my calendar. We can talk one-on-one about your situation. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourself, take care of your people, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.